I wrote an article recently that was talking about steps we can take when we feel overwhelmed. And in it, I mentioned how that old advice of if you feel angry or you feel riled up or whatever you feel, take 10 breaths or count to 10 and then respond. And I addressed that in there, and I wanted to go into more detail here because often I think that advice only lends itself to putting off the inevitable reaction or the initial reaction. So you might react to something, have that reaction, go, oh, I'm going to count to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then react in the same way as the initial reaction anyway. And I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into that and speak about the difference between reaction and response and what we actually do in those 10 breaths or those 10 counts that makes that difference. So instead of counting to 10 or breathing for 10 breaths and reacting in the exact same way as the initial reaction, what's actually important is creating that space and then reassessing at the end of that 10 how it is you feel and what it is you can do, rather than holding that reaction, carrying it with you through to the end. You actually check in and reassess and go, actually, now that I've taken that space, how do I want to respond to that? There is a quote from Viktor E. Frankl. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He's a psychologist, very, very wise, lots of wisdom in his work. Man's Search for Meaning, he was an Auschwitz prisoner. And it's very, very insightful. But one of his quotes, and I've shared it before in different ways, and I myself keep coming back to it time and time again. It's between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So he talks about having a space between what triggers us, what the stimulus is, and that space in between before we actually respond, and how we can almost lengthen that space so that it's not the initial reaction, but it then becomes the response instead. So that space gives us the power. So he's talking about in that space is the power to choose how we want to respond. So again, it's not carrying the reaction with you and just taking those 10 breaths or counting to 10 and then delivering the same reaction and just delaying the inevitable. It's actually sitting into the space and reassessing. So reassessing is the key bit that I feel like sometimes we miss or we just don't understand completely. And what happens when we can reassess is that we can approach what triggers us or approach what has shown up that we need to process or that we need to sit with and feel into. When we have the space to do that, we're able to grow because we're not stuck in the same cycle of reactivity. So he talks about in our response lies our growth and our freedom, and we can actually free ourselves in the sense of we're not at the mercy of our reactions. We have more power to take that space, and we can sit in our own power a lot more when we step back and choose to respond instead. So it's come up. One of my students and now friends has brought up over the last few weeks, noticing when we've been talking and sharing, noticing moments for me that I have been holding back and just responding instead rather than reacting. So I've deliberately taken time and gone, I didn't want to reply to that email straight away, or I didn't want to respond to that message or that trigger or whatever it was straight away. I actually decided to take some space and really feel into it and really just assess what it was within me that was feeling triggered, but also give it space to breathe, give it space to settle so that way when I did say something, it was more deeply ingrained in my truth than what the initial reaction would have been, so that I could express myself more really for me and in a more articulate way often than, again, what that initial reaction could be. And that actually relates to the article I wrote this week, is about what's held me back before from expressing myself. And often it's because I haven't taken the space to actually process what it is I need, so that I couldn't articulate it at all in a way that made any sense to me, let alone the other person involved. So when you take those counts to 10, however you do that, or when you take that pause, and even if you're doing the faux breaths because you're just annoyed, you're like, you're doing those, try to step away from carrying that initial reaction with you and then just delivering it at the other end anyway, and feel into it. Take some space, ask if you need space, say like, I just need a moment to process that. If you need to actually ask it out loud, say if it's in person, if it's an email, take a step back, walk. Pacing helps because you're shifting your energy and you're processing in motion. So whatever's getting in the way is kind of moving and shifting out of the way. But allow yourself to take that space between the stimulus and the response and reassess at the other end. That is the really important part. So allow yourself to check in on the other side of the breaths or the other side of the count, so that you can actually deliver your truth in how you do respond. And that'll make a big difference in how you show up, how you allow or invite others to show up with you, and often in what you can then achieve or what you can then experience, whether it's within relationships like personal or work or whatever, or within your experience in those environments as well.